The bread knife slowed in my hand, just as Vanessa stepped into the kitchen, arms folded, like she'd been rehearsing this moment. The slices weren't even yet, but I stopped anyway. "You either find a way to earn again," she said, "or we look at care homes." She didn't look at me when she said it. Just spoke it into the tile floor like she was talking to a stain she couldn't scrub out. I set the knife down and wiped my palms on the edge of the towel tucked into my waistband. The kitchen smelled of warm tomatoes and thyme, but the air had gone cold. "Is this really about money?" I asked, keeping my voice soft. Vanessa exhaled, like that was a silly question. "Mom, we've talked about this. The bills are climbing. We're short every month. And I need the guest room. You know I'm trying to build the client base. I need a home office." I nodded slowly. "Right. Of course." The words felt like chalk in my mouth. I didn't mention the envelope I had slipped under their door last fall. 3 months mortgage covered, no questions asked. I didn't remind her I'd picked up every grocery bill that summer, or that I'd watched the kids most weekends, so she and Marcus could go to those marriage workshops they swore were helping. None of that seemed to matter anymore. I looked at my coat hanging near the door. My sketchbook was still tucked in the inside pocket. I hadn't touched it in months, maybe years. "I'll clean up here," I said quietly. Vanessa nodded already, halfway out of the room, tapping something into her phone. I rinsed the bread knife, set it back in the drawer, and folded the towel. My hands moved automatically, like they had every evening for years. But everything else felt different now. I took the sketchbook from my coat and carried it to my room. The brochures started showing up on the kitchen counter a few days later. Glossy pages filled with sunshine and cheerful women in pastels, sitting at pianos or tending raised garden beds. Vanessa left them there like takeout menus. Casual, just another option to consider. "I thought Meadow Grove looked nice," she said one morning while pouring coffee. "They have water aerobics and a memory wall." I didn't say anything, just stirred my tea and watched the steam rise. She slid the page toward me. "You wouldn't have to cook or clean. They do your laundry." "I like cooking," I said, finally. She smiled too quickly. "I know. I'm just saying, might be time to think about your next chapter." I didn't respond. Instead, I picked up the page and folded it neatly before slipping it into the drawer with the napkins. That night, as I carried the folded laundry down the hall, I paused just outside their room. Marcus was on speakerphone. His voice carried in that too casual way men speak when they're trying to sound like it's no big deal. "Yeah, once we get the back room cleared out, we can finalize everything," he said. "They won't approve the refinance with her still on the title, but we're working on it." My chest went still. "She's not going to make a fuss," Vanessa added. "She's compliant." Compliant. I stood there until the call ended and the bedroom door clicked shut. Then I walked back to the guest suite, my suite for now, and sat down on the edge of the bed. So that was the plan. The brochures weren't a suggestion. They were a signal. The timing, the cold tone, the way Vanessa had started referring to the room as the back, it all aligned. It was never about my income. It was about the square footage I was occupying. The space they'd already promised to someone else. I stood and opened the closet. My sketchbook was on the top shelf. I pulled it down, ran my hand over the cover, and opened to the first page. I found Vanessa in the hallway with a stack of cardboard boxes one morning. She didn't flinch when she saw me, just kept sorting through the hall closet like it was a task she'd put off too long. "This stuff in here, do you need any of it?" she asked, already. Pulling down a basket of scarves and my old knitting bag. I said, "Some of that's winter wear," but she was already sealing a box with packing tape. The marker squeaked as she wrote across the side misc, "Donate." My coat was still hanging on the peg by the stairs. She walked right past it. "Thought I'd get ahead of things," she said, like this was a generous act. I nodded and stepped aside as she passed me with the box in her arms. I didn't ask where she was taking it. I already knew. Later, My granddaughter peeked into the room while I was folding laundry. "Are you moving, Grandma?" she asked. Her voice was soft, uncertain. I smiled, smoothing the shirt in my hands. "Not yet," I said. She stood there a minute longer, then ran off when she heard her mother call. That night, after the dishes were done, and the house had settled into its usual hush, I sat on the edge of the bed, with my sketchbook open in my lap. The pages had yellowed slightly at the edges, but the drawings were still clean. I turned one after another, a stacking toy that could be reconfigured into animals, a puzzle ball designed to teach toddlers hand strength. None of them had made it into production. They were designs from my final year before I left the company. I laid the sketchbook on the bed and turned on the lamp beside me. Then one by one, I began taking photos of the pages with my phone. I didn't rush. I adjusted the angle, made sure the light was even. When I was finished, I opened my email and typed in a name I hadn't written in over a decade: Maya Ellison. Her company had once been a tiny offshoot. Now she ran Bright Found Toys. 2 days passed before Maya responded. The subject line read, "Is this really from you?" I opened the message carefully, half expecting it to be polite dismissal or confusion. Instead, it began with warmth that reached through the screen. "We've been looking for you," she wrote. "Those sketches are brilliant, pure Claudine. Can we talk? I'll be in town tomorrow and would be honored to come by." I stared at the blinking cursor before typing back, "Tomorrow at 4. I'll be ready." I spent the next morning quietly. I folded my clothes with a kind of reverence, the way you do when you're not sure what comes next, but want to meet it with dignity. I tucked the sketchbook between 2 sweaters in my overnight bag and zipped it, slowly making sure the teeth caught clean. Downstairs, I made tea, wiped down the counters, and left a note on the fridge: "Dinner's in the oven. Check it after 6. Old habits die hard. At 3:45, I sat in the kitchen, hands folded, the small bag by my feet. The rain had started light at first, just tapping at the windows. I welcomed it. Vanessa walked in at 4:10, pausing when she saw the bag. Her brow lifted, guarded. "Going somewhere?" she asked. I smiled gently. "Yes." She didn't ask where, just shifted her weight, unsure whether to press further. Before she could, the sound of tires on wet gravel echoed up the drive. A car door opened, then closed. Vanessa turned toward the window and parted the curtain with 2 fingers. I watched her face. First confusion, then recognition. Then something else. Something quieter. The Mercedes was newer than I remembered Maya ever driving, polished, understated. I heard the tap of her heels on the walk before the knock came at the door. I stood, picked up my bag, and walked past Vanessa without a word. I opened the door and saw Maya standing there, umbrella in one hand, her eyes bright with welcome. She said, "Ready?" I nodded, stepped outside, and closed the door behind me. The air inside the Bright Found studio carried that familiar mix of paint, coffee, and warm plastic, just enough to stir something deep in my chest. I hadn't stood in a space like this in years, but my body remembered. The energy, the quiet hum of machines, the rustle of blueprints on long tables. A young woman with streaks of green in her hair looked up from her workstation and gasped, "Oh my God!" "You're Claudine Ashby," she said, rushing over before I could respond. "You're the reason I'm in this field." She hugged me and I let her. It wasn't the kind of greeting I was used to, but it didn't feel misplaced. Her name tag read Iris. Maya walked beside me, giving me time to take it all in. The walls were covered in prototypes, some familiar. One of the stacking puzzles looked nearly identical to my version from 1998, only sleeker with rounded edges and brighter colors. "We based that one off your archive," Maya said. "We'd hoped to credit you, but your name wasn't reachable anymore." I ran my fingers along the table edge, grounding myself in the space. Every shelf seemed to echo with curiosity. No clutter, just intention. I don't want to be a museum piece, I said. Maya smiled. Good. Because we don't want your past, we want what's next. She handed me a badge with my name already printed on it. Underneath, in small type, visiting designer. She led me to a cornered desk near a window. Natural light spilled across the surface. A fresh notebook pens and a set of colored pencils waited in a neat row. My bag felt heavy with the sketchbook inside it. I opened it carefully and turned to a blank page. It felt like the first day of school, only better. Because this time, I didn't have to prove I belonged. I picked up a pencil, drew one slow curve, and let my hand follow where the idea took me. The call came in while Vanessa was at her desk. I wasn't there to hear it, but I could imagine her tone measured at first, then sharp around the edges when she realized what the banker was saying. They needed my signature. The deed had never been transferred. All those quiet assumptions she and Marcus had made, every late-night calculation whispered in that kitchen, they were built on air. Maya mentioned it to me later gently. The company accountant had worked with the same bank and overheard. I think your daughter's having some financial hiccups, she said. I only nodded. At Brightfound, I sat in the lunchroom with a spread of color swatches in front of me. Reds that leaned coral greens that reminded me of the playroom carpet from our first factory. Maya wanted a line that evoked nostalgia without leaning too sweet. I mixed shades until I found one that felt right. Warm but alive, I murmured. Iris looked up from her sandwich and smiled. You sound like you're describing a person. Maybe I was. Across town, Vanessa tore through drawers and cabinets, searching for paperwork that didn't exist. She called the realtor, demanding answers, then hung up mid-sentence when she heard the truth. Without my consent, the refinance couldn't proceed. Without that, there was no cash flow, no office remodel, no easy way forward. I set my pencil down and reached for my tea. I'd thought that severing ties with the house would break something in me, but it hadn't. Instead, it had clarified things. That place had always belonged to love, not signatures. Once the love left, the walls were just lumber. Maya stopped by my table before heading into a meeting. We'd like to feature your new designs in the holiday catalog, she said. Front page. I smiled, unsure if she knew how far that news would travel once printed. By evening, the prototype molds were ready, stacked neatly in boxes waiting to be labeled. I ran my hand across the top one before leaving the studio, thinking of all the boxes still sitting unopened back at Vanessa's house. The catalog landed in mailboxes the first week of November. Brightfound's holiday edition, heavy gloss, thick pages, the kind you don't toss in the recycling bin right away. On the front cover, 3 children sitting on a carpet, beaming, surrounded by a colorful display of stackable puzzle toys. Above their heads, in clean serif font, designed by Ashby. I saw it on the counter at the studio first. Iris had picked up a dozen to pass out to family. Maya handed me one, her smile soft. It's already getting attention. Across town, Vanessa hadn't received hers yet, but Mrs. Loring next door had. She knocked lightly on the frame before stepping in. I saw this and thought of you, she said. Flipping the page to the cover. Didn't know your mom was back in the game. Vanessa took it lips, pulling into something that wasn't quite a smile. Neither did I, she murmured. Later that night, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop. She typed my name into the search bar like it was a dare. What came back filled the screen. Photos of me at the studio standing beside Maya at the showcase. Clips of interviews I hadn't expected to go far. Quotes about resilience, creativity, second chances. A headline from a popular blog, Legend Returns, Ashby inspires new generation. She clicked through each one slowly, the way someone reads a stranger's story and then realizes it's about them. Upstairs, my granddaughter had already clipped one of the catalog pages and pinned it to her corkboard. At the studio, the orders started coming in faster than projected. We expanded production to meet demand. Maya handed me an updated schedule and said, "They're calling it the Ashby effect." I didn't answer right away. I was staring at the calendar on the wall where December's showcase was circled in red ink. I hadn't used red ink in years, but this time it felt right. The design team wanted me there in person, and I planned to be. The apartment isn't much, but it's mine. A one-bedroom on the second floor with creaky floors and a view of the post office. The windows face east, which means I get the good light in the morning. That's when I sit with my tea and sketchbook and let the day start quiet. I picked out my own curtains. Soft gray with a faint stitched pattern, not trendy, not loud. Just right. I hung them myself the day I moved in, standing on a step stool, while the sun made little squares on the hardwood. There's a small balcony just wide enough for a chair and 3 planters. I'm growing basil, mint, and thyme. They're not fancy, but they smell good in the afternoon when the heat softens the leaves. I go into Brightfound twice a week now. Maya insisted on a more formal arrangement, but I asked her to keep it light. No pressure, no contracts. Just work when it feels right. Last Thursday, Iris knocked on my desk with a hopeful look in her eyes. "Would you ever consider mentoring?" she asked. "Like part-time?" Just to help us through a few prototypes, I said yes before she could finish. It was the easiest decision I've made in years. I take the bus sometimes. Sometimes Maya sends a car. Either way, I always arrive early, always stay a little late. There's something about seeing other people create with their hands that makes mine itch to do the same. That evening, I came home and put away the last of the moving boxes. There weren't many. I'd left most things behind and the rest I'd chosen carefully. I opened a cupboard and slid in the last dish. No labels written by someone else. No tape across the top. No one watching what I kept. I turned off the light in the kitchen and stood for a moment in the hallway. It smelled like soap and fresh wood polish, nothing more. I walked back into the living room, sat down with my sketchbook, and drew something soft and round, something that felt like it belonged in a child's hand. The message came on a Sunday afternoon. Simple, casual even. "The kids miss you. Can we have dinner?" No apology, no explanation. Just a line dropped into my inbox like nothing had happened. I stared at it for a long time, letting the silence stretch around it. Then I closed the laptop. The next morning, I wrapped the box in plain brown paper and tied it with a thin blue ribbon. Inside was a limited edition toy from the holiday line, one of the first off the production floor. Brightfound had sent me a few to give as gifts. I signed the bottom of the toy in silver ink, just as they'd asked me to at the launch event. Only this one, I added something extra. Tucked inside was a folded note for the little hands that still believe in play. I didn't write my name. I didn't include a return address. I mailed it to Vanessa's house that afternoon. I imagined the way my granddaughter would open it, how her eyes might light up at the colors, the surprise. She wouldn't know it had come from me, not right away, but I hoped she'd recognize the shape of it, the softness, the thought. The kind of love that builds something with care, even when no one's watching. I made tea when I got home and watched the wind move through the trees outside my window. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant, just quiet, settled. I flipped open my sketchbook and began drafting a new line, smaller figures for younger toddlers. Textures that could calm fidgeting hands. Soft edges, warm colors. Iris had mentioned a sensory-focused product line during our last conversation. I told her I'd think on it. Now it felt like the right time. I adjusted the curve of the design, erased a line, and redrew it with more space between the arms. Some things are better when they're not trying to be held too tightly. The Brightfound Winter Showcase was louder than I expected. Children darted between display tables, cheeks red from the cold hands full of toys they hadn't yet convinced their parents to buy. Someone played soft music near the entrance, but the real sound came from the laughter echoing through the space, like wind through tall grass. I stood near the front beside the table that bore my name. The display was simple, clear labels, soft lighting, and a sign that read, "Designed with wonder in mind." My name was printed in small letters at the bottom of the sign. That was all I needed. Maya found me just before the doors opened to the public. She touched my shoulder and smiled. "Let's make it official," she said. Then she stepped up to the mic near the main stage. "Thank you all for coming to Brightfound's Winter Showcase. I'd like to introduce someone many of you may already know. This is Claudine Ashby, our inspiration, and the heart behind so many of today's featured designs." There was a brief round of applause. I nodded politely, but stayed where I was. Later, a little girl with curls and a red coat picked up one of the toys from the shelf and hugged it to her chest. She didn't notice me watching. She just smiled and carried it off to show her father tugging at his coat until he knelt to see. I stayed by that table most of the afternoon. A few parents asked for photos, and one teacher asked if I'd ever consider visiting a school. I gave her Maya's card. I never once looked for Vanessa in the crowd. Not during the announcement, not during the signings, not even when I saw a child wearing a coat like the one I'd bought my granddaughter last winter. It wasn't that I didn't think of them. I did, but not with sadness, just distance, like something already let go. I turned back to the table, adjusted one of the figures that had tipped slightly on its stand, and smiled as a new set of hands reached up to take it.